My dad left me and my brother a house worth $280,000. 4 years later it's worth $610,000. We never agreed on anything. We just got richer while hating each other. My father died on a Tuesday in October, which felt appropriate somehow. He was a Tuesday kind of man, not the excitement of a Friday, not the dread of a Monday, just a quiet, unremarkable passage from one thing to the next. He died in the house he'd bought in 1981 for $47,000, a 2-story colonial on Elmore Street with a detached garage and a Japanese maple in the front yard that he'd planted the year I was born. I am the younger brother. I was 39 years old when he died. My brother Daniel was 44. Dad left us the house equally. 50% to Daniel Arthur Marsh. 50% to me, Kevin James Marsh. No instructions. No preference expressed. Just a split so clean it felt almost cruel, like he'd known exactly what he was doing, like the whole thing was one final wordless test. I should tell you what the house meant to me before I tell you what it became worth, because the money came later and the meaning was always there first. I learned to ride a bike in that driveway. I kissed a girl named Priya Nair on that back porch when I was 16 and she smelled like sunscreen and chlorine from the Henderson's pool next door. My mother died in the upstairs bedroom, the one with the east-facing window, when I was 22, and for 3 years after that I would drive past the house sometimes just to sit in the car outside and feel close to something I could name. My father never repainted after she died. The walls stayed the same slightly too yellow color she'd chosen in 1994, and somehow that felt like love to me. Daniel left for college in 1997 and never really came back. Not to the house, not to Elmore Street, not to the particular gravitational field of a childhood place. He lives in Scottsdale now. Has lived there for 11 years. He has a wife named Carolyn, 2 kids in high school, a landscape business that does well, and absolutely no sentimental attachment to a 2-story colonial in a mid-sized Midwestern city that he visits exactly twice a year, once at Christmas and once in summer, when the visits are shorter than the flights. I live 12 minutes from Elmore Street. I have lived within 15 minutes of that house my entire adult life. Whether that is devotion or failure to launch depends entirely on who you ask. The first conversation happened 3 weeks after the funeral, in the kitchen of the house itself, over coffee neither of us actually wanted. Daniel had flown in to help sort through Dad's things, and he was already visibly itching to return to Arizona, to his routine, to his life that had successfully escaped the orbit of everything here. "We should talk about what we're doing with the place," he said. "I know. I've been looking at comps. We're probably sitting at 280, maybe 290 if we catch the right buyer. I don't want to sell it." He put his mug down. Not hard, but deliberately. "Kevin, I mean it. I want to keep it. I'll buy you out." With what? That was the question, wasn't it? I was a high school history teacher making $58,000 a year. I had $31,000 in savings and a mortgage on my own small house 2 miles away. I could not buy Daniel out at $140,000, not without gutting myself financially, not without a loan I wasn't sure I could get. I told him I needed time to figure it out. He said okay. He flew back to Scottsdale. That was 4 years ago. Update 1, month 3. The positions harden. By January, 3 months after the funeral, we had established our respective positions with the kind of rigid clarity that I think only money and grief can produce together. Daniel wanted to sell. He had reasons that were not unreasonable. The house needed work, the roof was aging, the furnace was original to 1994, the master bathroom had a slow leak that had been a slow leak for 6 years. He estimated $40,000 in necessary repairs before any serious sale could happen, and he did not want to put $20,000 into a house in a city he didn't live in. He also, and he said this plainly, needed the liquidity. The landscape business had taken a hit during a rough summer, and his older kid was 2 years from college tuition. $140,000 landing in his account would solve a number of problems that were currently unsolved. I understood this. I am not a person who fails to understand other people's practical circumstances. But understanding something and accepting it are not the same action, and I could not accept selling the house. What I could do was stall, legally and legitimately, while I figured out my options. I hired a real estate attorney named Patricia Okonkwo, who came recommended by a colleague at school whose parents had gone through a similar dispute. Patricia was 51 years old, direct in the way of someone who has heard every variety of family mess and stopped being surprised by any of it, and she explained my situation with admirable clarity. "You own 50% of a jointly inherited property," she said. "Your brother owns the other 50%. Neither of you can sell without the other's consent, and neither of you can force a sale without going through partition proceedings, which is a court process that takes time and costs money. You have rights here. How much time are we talking?" Partition proceedings, if he initiates them, can take anywhere from 8 months to 2 years depending on the court, the complexity, and whether the property is sold by the court or divided. In the meantime, you have equal right to occupy and maintain the property. I asked her what I should do. She said the first thing was to get a formal appraisal and put everything in writing. The second was to start tracking every expense related to the house, because if I was paying for maintenance and upkeep, that would factor into any eventual financial settlement. I did both things. I got an appraisal, $283,000 in January of that year. I opened a dedicated account for house expenses and began paying for the utilities, the lawn care, the small repairs. I paid for a plumber to fix the slow leak in the master bath, $380. I paid to have the gutters cleaned, $200. I documented everything. I also began looking seriously at refinancing my own home to extract equity. My house had appreciated modestly. I could potentially pull out $90,000 to $100,000. Combined with my savings and a personal loan, a buyout was perhaps possible. Not comfortable, not wise by conventional financial logic, but possible. Daniel and I spoke on the phone every few weeks during this period. The calls were civil. We were both trying, I think, to remember that we were brothers before we were adversaries. He asked about my kids. I have 2, a daughter in 8th grade and a son in 6th, and I asked about his. We talked about Dad sometimes. What we didn't do was make any progress. I just need you to at least consider that selling is the rational choice, he said during one call in February. I'm considering it, I said. I'm also considering every other option. Kevin. It's a house. I know what it is. Update 2, Year 1. The neighborhood starts changing. Something was happening on Elmore Street, and I noticed it before Daniel did, because he wasn't there to see it and I drove past twice a week. The Hendersons' old house, the one with the pool, the one Priya had swum in the summer I was 16, sold in March to a couple in their early 30s named Okafor. They gutted it. New windows, new siding, a landscaped front yard with ornamental grasses and a stone pathway. The sale price was $340,000, which surprised everyone on the block. 2 houses down, a Victorian that had been a rental for 15 years sold to a developer who converted it into 2 upscale condominiums, each listed at $215,000. A coffee shop opened on the corner of Elmore and Meridian, in the space that had been a dry cleaner since I was in elementary school. It was called Fellow Traveler and it had exposed brick and $6 lattes and a line out the door on weekend mornings within 3 months of opening. I am not naive about what this means when it happens to a neighborhood. I am a history teacher. I know the pattern. I watched it happen in other parts of the city over the past decade and I knew what usually followed. The values climb, the long-time residents who rent get squeezed out, the character shifts, the neighborhood becomes something else, something that looks like improvement on the surface and is improvement in some ways and is also loss in ways that don't show up in property assessments. But I will be honest, I watched this happening on Elmore Street and part of me felt something complicated, something adjacent to hope. If the values were rising, my buyout math was getting harder, Daniel's share was growing, but the house itself was becoming something the market recognized, something that had been undervalued for years and was now being corrected. I had a conversation with Patricia in June, about 14 months after the funeral. The house is worth more now, I told her. I think it's up to around $320, maybe $330. That's good for both of you, she said carefully. It's not good for my buyout. His 50% is now worth more than I can easily pay. What are you thinking? I told her what I was thinking. I was thinking that if the neighborhood was genuinely transforming, and I had begun researching the city planning documents, the zoning changes, the 2 new developments approved within a half-mile of Elmore Street, then the house might be worth significantly more in another few years. Which meant the strategic move was not to rush. Not to force a resolution. To let time do something, while I managed the carrying costs and continued to maintain the property. You're gambling that appreciation outpaces the cost of delay, Patricia said. I'm gambling that I understand the neighborhood better than my brother does. Daniel called in August of that year, freshly re-energized about selling. He'd had a friend who was a commercial real estate agent visit Elmore Street and report back about the coffee shop, the renovation activity, the general signs of a neighborhood in transition. We should sell now, he said. Before the boom peaks. You know how these things go, there's a window. Or we're at the beginning of a sustained appreciation cycle and selling now is leaving money on the table. Or it corrects and we sell for less in 2 years than we can sell for right now. He wasn't wrong that this was a possibility. He wasn't wrong about most things, analytically. The frustrating thing about Daniel is that he is intelligent and his reasoning is usually sound, and I was not opposing him because his logic was flawed. I was opposing him because logic was not the only thing operating in me. I did not tell him about the planning documents. I told him I wasn't ready to decide. Update 3, Year 2. The partition filing. Daniel filed for partition in October of the second year. I had expected it. Patricia had expected it. When you own half of something and the other half owner refuses to cooperate for 18 months, partition is the rational legal move. It is not hostile, exactly. It is just the mechanism the law provides for resolving exactly this kind of impasse, but it felt hostile. It felt like a door closing. I remember sitting in my car outside the house when I got Patricia's call telling me the filing had landed. The Japanese maple was turning. My father had planted it the year I was born, which made it 39 years old, the same age I had been when he died, and it had grown into a substantial tree, the kind that takes over a front yard in the best possible way, the kind of tree that makes a house look like it belongs to someone. I sat there for a long time. Patricia explained the process. The court would appoint a commissioner to assess the property. There would be an opportunity for either of us to buy the other out at a court-assessed value. If neither bought the other out, the court would order the property sold at auction or through a real estate agent, with proceeds split equally. What's the court-assessed value going to be? I asked. Based on current comps? Probably $340 to $360. His share, $170,000 to $180,000. My saving situation had improved somewhat, a combination of my own home's continued appreciation, careful saving over the past 18 months, and a small amount I'd received as a beneficiary on a life insurance policy my father had maintained that neither of us had known about until the estate attorney found it. I could potentially reach $160,000, maybe $165,000. I was still short, but closer than I'd been. I asked Patricia if I could request a delay in proceedings to attempt a private settlement. She said yes. Courts generally preferred that parties resolve these things without judicial intervention. She filed the request. I called Daniel that evening. Not through the attorneys. Just called him, the way we used to call each other before any of this happened, before the house became the thing between us. I got the filing, I said. I know. I'm sorry, Kevin. We've been going in circles for a year and a half. I know we have. I need this resolved. So do I. I want to buy you out. I'm asking for 6 more months to get the financing together. Silence. Then, how much can you get to? Close. I'm close, Daniel. Give me 6 months. Another silence. He is not a cruel person, my brother. He is a practical person, and practical people can seem cruel when they're simply trying to close the loop on something that has been open too long. 6 months, he said. If we don't have a deal in 6 months, I'm not withdrawing the filing. I said okay. I spent the next 6 months doing everything I could. I refinanced my own home, pulling out $87,000 in equity. I drew down my savings. I applied for a personal loan at 2 different banks. I was honest with the loan officers about what it was for, about the fact that I was borrowing money to buy real estate I couldn't directly mortgage because of the shared ownership structure, and both banks declined me for exactly that reason. At the end of 6 months, I had $157,000. The court-assessed value had come back at $358,000. His share, $179,000. I was $22,000 short. I told Patricia. Patricia told me to make the offer anyway. Sometimes, she said, people accept what they can get rather than what the math says they deserve, especially when the alternative is an uncertain court process. I offered Daniel $157,000. He countered at $175,000. I didn't have $175,000. We were at an impasse again, but now we were at an impasse with a partition proceeding active and a 6-month clock I'd already spent. Update 4, Year 3. The delay becomes the strategy. Something I have not told you yet. I had been spending time in the house. Not living there. I have my own house, my kids, my life. But I had kept it up. I mowed the lawn, ran the heat in winter to protect the pipes, replaced 2 windows that had developed seal failures, had the furnace serviced and ultimately replaced when the HVAC company told me it was a liability. I spent $8,400 on the furnace. I spent $6,200 on the windows. I kept every receipt in a folder I had started calling, in my own head, the file. The file was not a revenge document. It was just documentation of the fact that I had been maintaining a shared asset at my own expense while the partition proceedings moved at their own slow, institutional pace. Patricia had advised me from the beginning that these expenditures could be factored into a final settlement, that a court would likely consider them when dividing proceeds. Daniel knew I was maintaining the house. We had talked about it. He had offered, early on, to split the carrying costs, and I had declined, partly because I wanted to maintain the connection to the property and partly, I will be honest, because I understood intuitively that having all the expense on my side of the ledger gave me standing that he didn't have. This is not heroic. I am not presenting it as heroic. It is the strategy of someone who could not win on raw financial terms and so was playing a longer game. The partition proceedings moved slowly, as Patricia had predicted. The court was backlogged. The commissioner had multiple cases. There were procedural continuances that pushed the hearing dates back. A year into the active filing, we still had no resolution date. And in that year, Elmore Street kept changing. A restaurant opened 4 blocks away that got written up in the City magazine. A boutique hotel project broke ground near the Meridian intersection. 2 of the original houses on the block sold for over $400,000 to buyers who, in both cases, either renovated extensively or tore them down and built new. A young city council member who lived 3 streets over started talking publicly about this neighborhood as a model for organic revitalization, which is the kind of thing that gets said right before the property taxes jump. I got a casual, non-binding market estimate from a real estate agent in spring of year 3, $480,000. I did not tell Daniel immediately. I sat with this number for a few weeks. When I finally told him, there was a long pause on the phone. $480, he said. Give or take. That's $240 each. More than the $179 you were holding out for. Another pause. I could hear, in the silence, the recalculation happening. Daniel is good with numbers. He was always better at math than me. So now you want to sell, he said. Now I want you to understand that neither of us was entirely right about the timeline. Kevin, do you want to sell the house or not? No, I said. I still don't want to sell the house. I want you to give me more time, because the house is worth more and the right financing is going to reflect that, and maybe I can get to your number. He made a sound I can only describe as the sound of a man who has been in a negotiation for 2.5 years and is beginning to suspect it will never end. You know what I think, he said. Tell me. I think you don't have a plan to buy me out. I think you never had a realistic plan. I think you're holding on to this house because of some emotional thing that has nothing to do with any actual plan, and I've been waiting for a plan that isn't coming. I didn't say anything for a moment. Maybe you're right, I said. That's not an answer. I know. We didn't talk for 3 weeks after that call. It was the longest we'd gone without speaking since our father died. Update 5, Year 4. The number that changed everything. The partition proceedings finally reached a hearing date in the fall of Year 4. By this point, Patricia and I had developed what I can only describe as a detailed and thoroughly documented case for how any proceeds should be divided, accounting for the $31,000 plus I had spent on maintenance and capital improvements over 4 years. We had receipts, invoices, dated records. Patricia estimated a court would likely award me a 55 to 45 or even 60 to 40 split of proceeds given the contribution disparity, which was meaningful but not transformative. 2 weeks before the hearing, I had the house professionally appraised for the court. The appraiser was a woman named Sandra Weiss who had been doing residential appraisals in this city for 23 years. She spent an hour and a half in the house. She walked every room, measured the renovations the previous owners had done in 2016, noted the new furnace and windows. She drove the neighborhood. She pulled the recent comps, the houses that had sold for $400,000, $420,000, $455,000, the new construction that had listed at $540,000 2 blocks over. Her number, $612,000. I want to try to describe what it felt like to read that number. It felt like the Japanese maple in the front yard had turned out to be an oak, not because anyone had been wrong, but because oaks and maples don't look that different when they're seedlings, and sometimes it just takes 40 years to know what you planted. $612,000 meant Daniel's 50% was $306,000. It meant that even with a court-adjusted split accounting for my maintenance contributions, even if I got 55%, his share was over $275,000. There was no version of my finances in which I could buy him out. Not without selling my own house. Not without appending everything I had built to preserve everything my father had left. I called him. The appraisal came back, I said. I told him the number. He didn't say anything for a long time. 612, he finally said. Yes. Kevin. I know. We've been fighting over this house for 4 years. Yes. If we'd sold it when I first asked, he said slowly, working through it as he spoke, we'd have gotten $280, which means we each left somewhere around $160,000 on the table while we were fighting about it. That's one way to look at it. What's the other way? That the 4 years of not selling is the reason there's a 612 to divide now. Silence. I want to be angry at you, he said. I want to say you cost us time and money and legal fees and 4 years of this. But if you'd agreed to sell when I asked, the house would be someone else's. And whoever bought it would have made $300,000. Yeah. We were both quiet with that for a while. What the numbers say and don't say. The partition hearing happened on a Thursday in November. Patricia was prepared, her documentation was meticulous, and the commissioner was efficient. Daniel's attorney, a man named Greer who had the manner of someone billing by the 10th of an hour, presented the case for a straight 50-50 split. Patricia presented the case for an adjusted split reflecting my 4 years of maintenance expenditures. The commissioner awarded me 54% of proceeds. Daniel received 46%. We accepted the ruling rather than pursue further appeals. We listed the house the following Monday. It sold in 11 days. Final sale price, $608,000. Not the $612,000 of the appraisal. The buyers negotiated a modest reduction after the inspection flagged some aging electrical panel components, but close. After agent commissions, closing costs, and attorney fees for both sides, the net proceeds were approximately $561,000. My 54%, $302,940. Daniel's 46%, $258,060. Less his attorney's fees, which Patricia estimated at around $18,000 over the course of the proceedings. Less my attorney's fees, Patricia charged fairly, all things considered, but fairly for 4 years of intermittent legal work is not nothing. Call it $22,000. Less the $31,400 I had spent on maintenance and improvements, which had been factored into the split but represented real money I had already disbursed. So, I walked away with roughly $249,000 in my pocket. Daniel walked away with roughly $240,000. I am a high school history teacher. $249,000 represents more than 4 years of my salary. I paid off my refinanced mortgage, cleared the equity I had pulled to try to buy Daniel out, put money away for my kids' college funds, and had approximately $90,000 remaining that I did not immediately know what to do with. Daniel put his money into his business, paid off the college tuition he'd been anxious about, and bought Carolyn the kitchen renovation she'd wanted for 3 years. Neither of us bought the house. What I think about now. There is a young couple living at Elmore Street now. I know this because I drove past 2 months after the sale. Foolish, probably, but I needed to see it. They had put a welcome mat on the front porch that said something in a font I couldn't read from the street. The Japanese maple was there, which meant they had decided to keep it, and I felt an irrational, disproportionate gratitude for that small continuity. I think about the 4 years sometimes, the way you think about a particular stretch of your life that was difficult and formative and over. Here is what I know. Daniel was right that we should have had a clear plan from the beginning. He was right that the conflict cost us in ways beyond money. 4 years of strained phone calls, of legal fees, of the particular exhaustion of being in dispute with someone you love. He was right that I was holding on emotionally in a way that defied conventional financial logic. Here is what else I know. The house that sold for $608,000 in year 4 would have sold for $283,000 in year 1. The couple living there now, if they hold it another 10 years, will likely sell it for more than $1 million. The neighborhood is still changing. The arc is not finished. I did not hold the house out of a plan. I held it out of grief and stubbornness and a conviction that some things are worth more than their assessed value. Those are not clean reasons. They did not produce a clean result. What they produced was time, and time produced $612,000 where there had been $283,000, and then that number got divided, and then it got reduced by fees and expenses, and then 2 brothers each walked away with roughly $250,000 and no house. Daniel called me in December, the first real call we'd had since the closing, the first one where the house wasn't the reason for calling. "How are the kids?" he asked. "Good. Emma made the volleyball team. Marcus is doing a robotics thing." "That's great. Tell them their uncle says." "I will." "How's Carolyn?" "She's good. The kitchen looks amazing, if you ever want to come see it." "I'd like that." We talked for 40 minutes. About Dad, eventually. About what he'd paid for the house in 1981. About the fact that he had probably expected us to sell it without drama, without 4 years of legal proceedings, without the particular flavors of obstinacy we had each brought to the situation. He would have found the whole thing baffling, Daniel said. He would have told us we were both idiots. Yeah. A pause. Maybe we were. Maybe. I am 43 years old now. Daniel is 48. The house on Elmore Street belongs to someone else, and the Japanese maple my father planted the year I was born is still standing in front of it, in a neighborhood that looks nothing like the one I grew up in and everything like what someone decided it should be worth. The number was $608,000. Neither of us won. Neither of us entirely lost. We are brothers, which is the thing that was true before the house and is true after it, the thing the money could neither create nor destroy. That is the whole story, except for the parts that are still happening.